But I remember so many days like waking up, crying and upset and kind of talking myself through this black hole spiral of like, I'm a big fat loser. Nobody's going to like my book. And I've wasted all this time and money. And my husband's going to hate me and blah, blah, blah.
Hey there, I'm Goli Kalkaran, and this is Lessons from a Quitter, where we believe that it's never too late to start over. No matter how much time or money you've spent getting to where you are, if ultimately you are not happy, then it's time to get out. If you're feeling stuck and you feel like there's gotta be more, there's gotta be a way to feel fulfilled and excited about what you do, then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I will sit down with an inspiring guest who quit their professional career in order to forge their own path and create a life that they love. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so happy you're here. And as I've said before, if you need any additional help kind of on your journey, I do a weekly newsletter where I send out a video or article that can help in some aspect, whether it's about overcoming fear or giving you tips of being a better speaker, a writer, or whatever it may be. I promise I don't spam you. It's once a week. You can sign up at the website lessonsfromaquitter.com, and you'll get that every Tuesday. I am really excited about today's episode. Like I said last week, I wanted to focus a couple episodes on people that are still in the middle of their journey. They're still kind of putting that next step together and figuring out what they're doing. I was realizing that I find it inspiring, and I think other people do find inspiration in looking at someone that has become very successful. Sometimes it's harder to relate to. Sometimes it's easy to write off and say, oh yeah, that person, quit and did this and now has a multi-million-dollar business, but I can never do that. And so I did want to show more people that made the jump more recently and are still kind of figuring out what their steps are, and to really dig deep into, was it worth it for them? How do they view that jump in the grand scheme of things? And that's what we get to do today with Mamta. So I'm really excited about that. And another aspect of her story that I really love and I want to highlight and kind of talk about more openly, it came up in last week's episode 22 with Sarah Rezvanpour Rose as well. And it has come up in a couple other episodes. And I've heard from people on social media or people that listen that reach out about this issue, and I really want to address it. So Sarah talked about how when she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do, she started reaching out to people and doing interior design work for free. And she could only sustain that for a little bit, and she ended up having to get a job, looking for a job, and getting one at Restoration Hardware, which I thought was the point of that story, is that a lot of people wouldn't have gone from being a lawyer to working at Restoration Hardware. And she did what she needed to do, which I think is so admirable, because I think we put too much on this ego of what I am and not so much of what do I want to do and what makes me happy. And so that was the part of the story I really liked. Now I realize that for some people, it's not possible to work for free. I understand that. We all have different circumstances and resources and wants and needs and everything else. And so I get that not everyone can do this. Obviously I realize that all of these stories aren't going to resonate with everyone. I try to give as many diverse journeys so that I can show you all of the different paths. But I do get that sometimes it's frustrating to hear about someone doing that when you can't do it. But one of the things that why I want to talk about that subject is that I do think a lot of people can and they don't. And so I do think it's worth talking about, because I know of a lot of people that are miserable in their jobs, and they can make it work on their spouse's income, and they can pare down their life a little bit in order to do what they want to do and work for free on just a weekend, on a Saturday or whatnot. And they choose not to, right? Because what would people think, or their ego, or whatever else is stopping them. And I think that's what I'm trying to highlight with these stories, is that a lot of times we put so much emphasis on money and how much money we're making. And even if we act like money isn't that important to us, we are kind of conditioned to chase that and make more and more and more. And a lot of times I'm finding there's a lot of people I talk to who are making a lot of money, and they could save it and they could then take a job that pays a lot less. But there is this hump of getting over that. And I'm trying to show that, look, the people that are making these changes and finding what they love to do are making that jump and doing something that isn't conventional. Also, I just think that money is a really important topic to really delve into and get really specific about the issues around it, because we all have so many issues. It's really funny because I've now talked to a lot of people that have reached out, and I can't tell you how many times I've had like these discussions with lawyer friends or people in other fields. I've had friends who are not making much as a lawyer. They're freelancing, they're working odd jobs as lawyers, and they're kind of getting by. They're paying their bills. And I've heard them say, yeah, if I was making multiple six figures, if I was a big law firm lawyer, I would totally quit, because I would save my money for a couple of years and then I would get out of this profession and I would do what I want to do. And then I hear from people that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars as big law firm lawyers, and they say like, oh, if I was making $50,000, I would have quit for sure a long time ago. Like, that's not worth it for me to do this job. Like, I hate this. And I can make that doing anything. And it's funny to me because it's an excuse, right? Like, both of them are hard. Both of them take you getting over whatever it is you getting over, whether it's being scared of like not having enough money to pay your bills or the identity, and I know that resonates with my story because I wasn't making that much. I was working as a public interest lawyer when I moved to California, and I was looking for work in the public interest realm. I mean, a lot of the jobs were paying like $35,000. I mean, I was applying for jobs that like I would make more working as like a manager at Nordstrom than I would making as a lawyer. But because I was a lawyer and obviously there was a cause that I wanted to work on, I was willing to do this job where I was working 70, 80 hours a week for nothing, And I realized that like that's sort of why I did this podcast is I realized there was such this hurdle for me to get over, like calling myself a lawyer, that it wasn't the money. Like the money was an excuse. And I'm not saying money is always an excuse. Obviously, we need to make money to pay our bills and live. And so I understand some people can't. I do think it's worth really exploring and seeing like, is it something you can? Like, can you make 40% less and do something you love? Can you work for free on a Saturday to find out what your passion is? I don't know. I mean, everyone's situation is different. Maybe you really can't. I understand that. But if you can, then maybe it's something to think about. And again, that comes up in Mamta's interview, and we kind of go in depth about that. So I'm really excited to jump into that. Mamta Jain Valderrama is a healthcare consultant turned PR agent. With a bachelor's in journalism and an MBA from USC, she left behind the corporate life over 5 years ago to pursue her dream of writing. Her debut novel, A Girl in Traffic, is an Amazon bestseller. In addition to writing and editing her novel, Mamta led her own international PR campaign. And in addition to writing her second book, she now offers PR services to authors and other small business owners. We cover a lot of the issues that I just talked about, and I think it's really helpful to hear it from her perspective. So without further ado, let's talk to Mamta. Hi, Mamta. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Goalie. It's nice to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. I'm so excited to jump into all of the amazing things you've done. I think you're our first novelist, so that is very exciting. We'll get
right.
I know. So we'll get into all that. Why don't you start out by letting us know a little bit about the beginning part of your career and what led you to business school?
Sure. So my path is anything but linear. I started as a journalist. I got my undergrad degree in journalism and then started my career as a healthcare reporter for a trade publication in Washington, D.C. And that was where I was first introduced to the world of healthcare, which ended up leading to a career in healthcare for the next 15 or so years. But it was when I was writing that I was approached in my early 20s by some of my colleagues that suggested that I give a try at doing some of the business side of the operations that were happening within this company that I was working for. And I was kind of caught off guard by that suggestion because I considered myself an artist, a poet, a writer, not somebody that knew how to do business, which to me meant numbers and wheeling and dealing. But I was also at a time and place where I could take risks, and I just thought, why not give it a shot? And ended up really loving it and having kind of a knack for it. So a career in doing business development and some operations ended up leading me to decide to come home back to California to get an MBA.
Okay, so when you say that you got more involved in the business aspect of that company, what did that entail? Like, what kind of work were you doing?
So I started out doing account management. So my job was to take existing clients that we already had and renew their membership in the services that they were buying from my company, and also expand their portfolio. So it was really about business development, I guess is the right word for what I was doing. And that was sales,
right?
And didn't know that I would be good at sales or have a knack for that, but I really enjoyed it.
That's interesting. And then so I guess enjoying that is what made you decide that you wanted to pursue business school?
Yeah, that was partly it. And also I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And so business has always been highly regarded as a profession in my family, in my immediate family, my larger family as well. So I think it was always kind of in my DNA, but I always considered myself so different from the rest of my family that as a writer, and then kind of laughed when I kind of came full circle back into what my parents hoped I would do.
Right. And did you kind of have an idea why you wanted to go to business school and what you wanted to do afterwards? Or was it just like you'd figure it out?
I kind of had an idea that I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. Again, I think I was just born with that itch inside of me. I had a couple of years of experience working in corporate America and learned a lot, but always felt like I always wanted to do something on my own, but didn't know what, and didn't really know if I had the skills to do that. So what I did know was that I wanted to stay in the world of healthcare, which I had already found a passion for and planned to pursue after business school as well.
Okay, so what did you do after business school?
So after business school, or let me back up and tell you that during business school, my plan was to start my own business. And I spent the last semester in business school writing a business plan and ended up having to scrap that plan. So just briefly, the business plan was around a company that I would offer to Americans to go abroad to get medical procedures that they couldn't afford to get in the United States. So it was called medical tourism. Medical tourism is happening today, but it's mostly people who go abroad for elective surgeries like plastics and augmentation. And I wanted to serve a need of, at that time, 45 uninsured Americans who couldn't afford health insurance in our country get medically necessary procedures at world-class hospitals abroad.
Is that because they would, even with like the flights and the cost of going somewhere else, it would just be cheaper to do it abroad?
It would just be cheaper, and they could get really good quality healthcare, the equivalent of what they could receive in the United States. So, my mission has always been to find a place where I can help people. A kind of a social justice niche or healthcare access was really important to me. And so that was my plan. But during the course of doing the research, writing this business plan, making my plans for my future to start this business, I came across a lot of articles and research that showed there were a lot of ethical issues involved with doing medical tourism, mainly human trafficking of human organs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So some of the same hospitals that were offering these services, medical services to Westerners, were also involved in these organ trafficking schemes through the black market. So I ended up having to scrap my whole business plan, just ethically could not try to pursue this kind of business, even if I wasn't directly involved in the trafficking world, but subsidizing that in any kind of way. Yeah. So I ended up instead working in corporate America in the healthcare field, a large dialysis company. I started there as an operations manager. So my job was to manage dialysis clinics. So everything that happened under the four walls of that clinic was my responsibility. So it was P&L ownership, staff management, et cetera. And then my second job there after the ops role was rolling out a national initiative for a new kind of innovative way to deliver dialysis services to kidney patients.
Oh, okay. And so how did you go from that to, starting to write this novel that you get into?
Yeah. So my novel is all related to all of this. So my novel is called A Girl in Traffic, and it's about human kidney trafficking. So in this world of trafficking that I mentioned earlier, kidneys are the most trafficked organ. I ended up, after business school, working at the kidney company. That was a coincidence. That was not intentional, that I was trying to get immersed in the world of kidneys. but it just kind of, all these seeds kind of kept getting planted about me learning about this problem around human kidney trafficking. Right. At the peak of kind of my misery working in corporate America, I decided that I wanted to write this book. And, the seed had been planted in business school when I learned about this problem of human trafficking with kidneys, but I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. So it kind of sat dormant in my brain for the next 5 or 6 years while I was working in corporate America. And then when I just felt like I was not fulfilling a mission, or there was a void inside of me and I was unhappy working, kind of slaving away for the man, I left it all and I walked away and I started writing full time.
I know you were obviously a journalist, and so you'd done that kind of writing, but had you ever done fiction work? And was that a part of what you wanted to do?
So the answer is no. I had never written fiction, didn't know if I would be any good at it. But what I did know was that my book would be rooted in true stories and fact. And I had a lot of experience doing that kind of writing. I've also always loved what's called literary journalism, which are kind of longer pieces that read more like essays or stories, but they're all true stories. So I've always been a big fan of that kind of long form journalism. So it kind of just came together for me because I had now a decade's worth of research around kidneys and trafficking, et cetera, that I was able to just write a compelling story. And I really just wrote a story that I thought I would want to read. I'm a big reader, and I thought I'm just going to write something that I'd want to read.
Yeah. And it sounds like a super interesting book, and we'll get more into the book. But I think that a lot of people in your position, having an MBA from USC and maybe finding yourself unhappy in the corporate world, would say, okay, I don't like this job, so maybe I'll just try to create my own business or whatnot. I think taking the risk to jump into authorship and writing a book, which is notoriously very difficult to make money from or make a living from. What made you kind of decide that you're not going to try, to do a business, but you'd rather go this creative route?
It was a very, very difficult decision. So I had just been newly married and overnight kind of split our family income in half when I just came home and said, I can't do it, I quit. And for a while, I was writing at the same time as job searching and interviewing. But you know what, Goldie, and I think a lot of your listeners could probably relate to this, that it just didn't seem to be my calling. So I'd go out for these interviews, I'd apply for these jobs, and just didn't click one way or the other for one reason or another. I felt like I was just like brutally forcing myself to fit into something that I just wasn't.
Right.
And inside of me, there was this thing that said, you need to write this book. It was like a sunk cost, like gaining all this knowledge about this problem, and also feeling like some civic duty that if I didn't do something with the knowledge, that I was kind of turning my back on this problem.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I do relate to exactly what you're saying. I think when applying for jobs, it's kind of a really interesting tell, because as you're applying, I remember when I was applying for law firm positions and I would feel like sick to my stomach. It was, it's like a way of realizing like, I really don't want to be doing this. So I fully understand that feeling. But was your family, your husband, all of them, were they supportive of this decision, or did you get like any pushback?
I did get some pushback. It wasn't so much from my family. My husband and I had long conversations about how we would live and how we would make this work. But, to be honest with you, he was and continues to be so extremely supportive. Once in a while, I'll still dip my toe back into the traditional job world and just see what's out there, maybe apply for a couple things. And he'll always just see me like, again, just trying to force myself into something that I'm not. And he also sees my potential because I work very hard. So a big part of this wasn't just writing and editing the book, but the marketing of it. Right. And so that's where my MBA came in very handy. Like, I don't regret any of my decisions of, deciding to get the journalism degree or deciding to get the MBA. I'm not in a position where I feel like those experiences or those skills are being wasted.
Right.
So that's really nice. And because I'm so passionate, right? Like, I'm like full force dedicating myself like a traditional entrepreneur.
Right. And so what did that look like for you when you started this book? Like, how long does it take to write a novel and before you got it published, and kind of going down that road of like figuring out how to publish it and stuff? Like, what was that like for you?
I didn't know anything about any of this. I learned things as it was time to learn them, because I know myself, like I'd easily get overwhelmed. So I just really focused on the writing, and that part took me almost 5 years to write and edit the book.
Wow.
So, yeah. And, the thing about writing a book is you invest all this time and a lot of money and resources, and you have no idea until it's done if it's any good.
Right.
Like, again, a sunk cost.
Yeah.
Luckily, mine did pretty well. And I just learned it as I went. So I did everything myself, Goalie. I self-published. I created my own little printing firm or publishing firm. And I just decided to go it on my own. And that was after doing a lot of research about all the different options that were out there from a publishing perspective and hiring additional talent, et cetera. Most of the stuff, I just decided that I'd be able to do it just as good, if not better, than if I hired somebody.
I love a couple of things that you said I want to highlight. Talking about kind of doing it as you go along, I think that is what most people fail to do, and that's why they get overwhelmed. I think we all get like that. It's whenever you're starting any new endeavor, whether it's starting a business or a side hustle or even a project. A lot of times we look at someone that's like 10 steps or 20 steps ahead, and then we get overwhelmed with the amount of things that you have to do. And it was the same when I wanted to start my business. In the beginning, I kept thinking about, oh my God, there's a million variables when you want to manufacture a product. And then on top of that, it's like setting up a business and how do you know the proper structure and who do you have to hire for and once I made a decision that I'm just going to do it one day at a time, I'm just going to do it step by step, it's like it all gets done. But when you kind of step back and you think, I want to write a book and publish it and go on, a book tour. I mean, it's so overwhelming because it's like, where do you start? That you have to just start. Well, what's that saying? Like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? I mean,
Right.
That's just the way it is. And so I love that you said that. How did you keep your motivation up? I think 5 years spending on writing something, it can be very difficult. It's one thing when you're in a job and you have to go and you have to be there 9 to 5 and stuff, but how did you keep your motivation to stick to the writing schedule?
Wow, that's a good question, Goalie. And, looking back, it's so easy to have the rosy colored glasses. But I remember so many days waking up, crying and upset and kind of talking myself through this black hole spiral of I'm a big fat loser. Nobody's going to like my book. And I've wasted all this time and money and my husband's going to hate me and blah, blah, blah. A couple of things that I did, because I'll just keep it real, instant gratification is always welcome in my house.
Right.
And
right.
So I would share some of the pages or a couple chapters with my very, very close friends and confidants as I was going along, just to see if I'm on the right track, if this is interesting. It really helped me to break up the day sometimes with half a day writing and then half the day doing something else that was book related, just learning about the publishing industry or learning when the time would come, at that time I was how do I join Instagram or whatever, doing all of those kinds of things. So I would just try to use different sides of my brain to help me keep motivated. And then other times were very dark and it was hard. And, your listeners might be interested to know that for the second half of my writing, I was pregnant and I had a very difficult pregnancy. The main character in my book is a very tragic, sad character, and it's a little girl. I was having a little girl, and I was so determined to finish writing this book before my daughter was born because I was just so frightened about seeing my daughter's face in this very tragic character.
Right.
And I didn't want that kind of karma.
Yeah.
So that was a good motivator too, because that was a very clear deadline of when she was going to come. So
it is a motivator, but it's also extremely difficult to do anything while you're pregnant. And I think having that kind of discipline says a lot. So you published it in 2016, right?
Right.
And so how did you do the marketing? You're saying you did it all yourself and it became an Amazon bestseller, which is incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So how did you tackle that?
So again, it was just one thing at a time. I made a plan, all the different types of marketing that I could potentially do. And then I pared it down to what was actually realistic for me. I had basically a $0 budget. So it was a lot about trying to get as many earned media postings as I could or spots in local, regional, or national types of publications, and then in the influencer world and all of that kind of stuff. But I had the journalism backgrounds, which correlates really nicely to doing public relations. And so some of that was just natural for me. I tend to be an extrovert. So it's very easy for me to cold call or reach out to people because my attitude is like, the worst is that they don't respond or say no. So I was really like throwing everything against the wall and then seeing what would come back. And that ended up leading to like a 2-year book tour that I was able to do. And that included across the country and a couple of things through Skype abroad. So, but I will tell you, Goli, it was like pure elbow grease and really pounding pavement. It was not like it just came so easily.
Right.
That was such hard work. And even still in the scheme of authorship or publications, like somebody would look at me and probably think that I'm small potatoes. But considering where I started from and the resources that I had access to, like it was quite a bit achieved.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is. And I think that a lot of people don't think about that part of it, especially in the creative world. And when you want to do something that is a passion and you have that creative aspect, like that's what fulfills you. I think a lot of times we neglect to think that if it's sort of a business and you have to put the marketing into it. And I think a lot of people try to do the first part, but without that second part, then there's no way for it to be successful because people don't just randomly find it.
Absolutely. And sometimes I felt very self-conscious, like, aren't people so sick of me talking about myself and posting my headshot and my book cover? And the truth is that some people probably were, but at the same time, like I still, to this day, Goli, like some of my followers that are people in my personal network, like literally last week, somebody who I've known almost my whole life sent me a message saying, I had no idea you wrote a book.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I was like, have you been on Mars for 3 years? Like, what's happening? And that was such a good learning for me. Like, wow, the marketing that I've done for my book recently has kind of been so much less because I've kind of moved on to other things now. But it was like at this moment of learning of, wow, there is still so much untapped potential or opportunity here.
Right. A lot of people that I've talked to want to write books, but people don't know what to do and don't know if it's worth it and whatnot. So from your experience now, at the tail end of this, like, is this something that you would do again?
Yes, absolutely. And I plan to. I'm already writing two other books. Yeah. I love it. I mean, talk about when you finally figure out what you're good at, which took me so long. I feel like I have finally found that and I absolutely will. But what I didn't know, again, it's kind of like my history is repeating itself, that I started as a writer and then was pushed to the business side. I actually loved doing the marketing piece too.
Right. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so, a lot of authors hate that part or don't know how to do that part because that's not their skill set. And I really love doing that part too. And so that's why I decided to pursue public relations because, in full candor, I can't just keep writing books that it's not a sustainable living from an income perspective. So offering PR services allows me the flexibility that I need in my life right now. And be able to do something entrepreneurial and also have the flexibility to continue writing as well.
That's amazing. So, you have your own PR agency and you do it mostly for other authors or for anybody?
So my niche is authors as well as small business owners. And I have a real particular penchant for women-owned businesses or businesses that have some kind of social mission integrated to whatever they're trying to achieve or trying to sell. Those are the kinds of people that I tend to attract and work really well with. So right now I have 2 clients and like 5 in the hopper.
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. So, and again, it is literally like pounding pavement to get these leads.
Right.
Like these Facebook groups for like mompreneurs or freelancers, like that is where I'm getting all of my leads. So something that your listeners might be interested in knowing.
Yeah, that's actually a great tip. And I don't know if people realize like how active Facebook groups are right now. And I do a ton of like activity in podcasting groups and it's such a wealth of information and so many leads and there's so many people helping each other. So everybody, whatever you're trying to do, whatever kind of business, I guarantee you there's an active Facebook group that you can find and get such amazing free resources from.
Yeah, absolutely. And great connections and advice. And that's where like 2 people that I met through one of those groups, just by commenting on one of their posts has led to some freelance work that they've sent to me.
this comes up a lot on this podcast, and this is just another great example of it, is that a lot of times as you're taking these steps, it leads to the next thing and the next thing. And like you wouldn't know how to do, let's say, PR for a book if you hadn't done it for yourself. And you wouldn't know that you love the marketing aspect of it and lead to this business now without having done this. And so I think a lot of times we're so scared because we want a foolproof plan and we want to know exactly where we're going to lead. But part of the fun of it is like doing it and seeing, there's this whole other section that I never even thought about, or I never thought I was good at, or that I could do. And now I'm realizing, oh, I can do this and I love this. And other people don't like doing this, which is like, that's where you're going to make your money, is if you like doing something that other people don't like doing, you can offer it as a service. So I love that you have parlayed that into a business.
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like everything that I've done, when I explain my story, it makes a lot of sense. But if you saw it on paper, you'd think I'm like kind of a basket case, maybe. I don't know.
No, and I think that's always, hindsight's 20/20. And then as you're going, you have no idea what you're doing. And then like you look back and you're like, oh, this all kind of made sense. It all led me to where I need to be, which I think is amazing. And I do think your story brings up another topic that I've wanted to address and talk about on the podcast, because I've gotten some feedback from people that listen to the podcast. So obviously in your situation, like you had your spouse who was supportive and you guys were able to work it out so that you could write. And now you're saying, obviously you're doing other things to supplement you guys' income. But I know a lot of people may not have that situation. And so they can't. And I understand that. I think that everybody has different paths. We all have different resources at our disposal. We have different circumstances. And what I'm hoping to do is provide as many unique, different stories to show people all of the different paths. But what I love about your story is that there are a lot of people, like I know a lot of people personally, that could, make it work on their spouse's salary or whatnot. But I don't want to take away from the fact that it is still mentally very difficult to walk away from a job with a secure salary, or, climbing this corporate ladder, or saying like, hey, I have this MBA from USC and I could go work at all these amazing companies and make a ton of money. Even though you have like some support and your family doesn't require your income, I think it's still psychologically very difficult to make that jump to say, I'm going to be a writer, even though writing, doesn't necessarily lead to much of an income. And I think that if we took a step back, there's a lot of people that like would be much happier pursuing something that they love and living on, one income, or paring down their lifestyle and doing something that gives them more satisfaction. But unfortunately, we're just so programmed to like always make more and always have more and buy the bigger house. And, your parents are going to be upset that you wasted your degree and whatnot. So I do love that you're saying like, even after this, like you still want to write because that's what you love doing. And like, that's what you should be doing.
Thank you. I agree. And I also think that if you're doing what you love, I mean, it's so obvious, but if you're doing what you love, then I think you'll put more passion into it. And so that's how I justify it, because I want to be real. Okay. I've had some very difficult conversations with my husband, even after the book came out. Like we're at a kind of a place in our family. We have a child. Like we need the second income.
Right.
That's where I've been, again, like, should I go back to the traditional workforce, or can I make this business happen? And so that's where I am right now. But the passion that I'm putting into like drumming up the business so that I don't have to go back to a job is where that difference is, that I'm willing to pull an all-nighter if I have to, just sending out pitches to companies to consider me. I wouldn't be willing to do that for some corporate job.
Absolutely. I think that we put this pressure that like, I'm going to be quit and be a writer. And if I do it, then I have to be like, this super successful author that's just going to make my living off of books. And I just don't think that has to be the reality. If you're looking for a fulfilled life and a life that you're doing things that you're passionate about, like we were just saying, it's not a straight path. And so maybe, you go back and you work, one of the things I want to show is like, it's not the end of the world. Like we create these illusions that like, once I do this, then I'll never get a job. I mean, like, that's not the truth, So it's like, okay, if your family gets into a position where you have to get another job, then maybe you go and get another job for a year or two or a couple of years until you can write another book, but at least you're putting yourself out there and doing something you love. Like you now have a novel that's an Amazon bestseller, and you've learned that whole thing, and now you can do the next one whenever you have the time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel the next one is going to take a lot longer. But I do feel like, okay, well, I know I could do it. So it's just a matter of timing of when. It's not like this goal that I still have yet to achieve.
Do you have any advice or any resources for anyone that does want to write their own book where they can kind of get started or what they should look at?
So the good news is that now the publishing world has changed so much with the internet, and there are so many wonderful resources out there if somebody wants to learn about publishing, in particular self-publishing. Just start with Googling that phrase and you'll just be inundated with lots of different resources. I'm also a resource too. So your listeners are welcome to contact me if they want to get some more specific advice. I'd be more than happy to advise them. Yeah.
How can they reach you? What's the best way to reach you?
So I'm on social. My handle is MJ Valdy. My last name is really long, so we truncated it with VALDY instead of the full 10 letters. And then I have my website, which is my full name, mamtajainvalderrama.com, or it might be easier to look me up by my book.
I'll definitely link to all these in the show notes. So if somebody is driving right now or can't get it, if you go to lessonsfromaquitter.com and you find this latest episode, I'll have all of the show notes and there'll be links to her website and all of her social and stuff. So if you want to find her, you can just go from there.
Okay, great. Yeah. If your listeners are interested in checking out the book, it's on Amazon, A Girl in Traffic.
Oh, great. Yeah. Everybody should definitely check out the book. I'm excited to read it. It sounds very interesting and I'm sure it's going to be sad and sort of
sad and triumphant. So.
And triumphant. Well, good. Well, thank you so much, Mamta. This has been wonderful. I really enjoyed hearing about your journey. And I do think that it is inspirational for a lot of people to see that like it is possible to do things that you love. You know, like you were saying, the publishing world has changed. So much has changed because of the internet that you don't have to wait for someone to give you an opportunity. You can go out and do whatever it is that you want to do.
Thank you, Goli. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you liked the podcast, please rate and review us on iTunes. It'll help other people find the show. If you want to connect or reach out, follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Lessons from a Quitter and on Twitter at Quitter Podcast. I would love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you on the next episode.